is like, you need to be able to explain this so that Windley can understand it. Now, understand the context. I'm the human resources person. So from a job title, I'm the kind of the least technical person, right, in the room, even though I do have an understanding of tech. But the point was that you need to be able to explain your product, even if it's a very technical product, right? If you're going out to the marketplace, so that a non-technical person can understand it.
Hello and welcome to the Tech for Non-Techies podcast. I'm your host, Sofia Matveyeva. If you're a non-technical founder building a tech product or adding AI to your business, you're in the right place. Each week, you'll get practical strategies, step-by-step playbooks, and real-world case studies to help you launch and scale a tech business without learning to code. And this is not another startup show full of jargon, venture capital theater, or tech bro bravado. Here, we focus on building useful products that make money without hype and without code. I've written for the Harvard Business Review and lectured at Oxford, London Business School, and Chicago Booth, so you are in safe hands. I've also helped hundreds of founders go from concept to scalable product. And now it's your turn. So let's dive in. Hello, smart people. How are you today? I got a question for you. What do Yahoo and a Coldplay concert have in common? Well, they're all HR nightmares, and today's guest has lived them. Today, you're going to hear from David Windley. David was the CHRO at Yahoo, and he has also held executive roles at Microsoft and Intuit and Activision, and he also scaled a startup to 50 million in revenue, and that startup is called IQ Talent, and now he is the CEO of another company called HootRecruit, and that's a recruiting tech company, and he sits on various boards. Anyway, why should you care about this? David is a non-technical leader who runs a tech company. He has also been a non-technical leader at the helm of seriously successful Silicon Valley tech companies. And so he's proof that you don't need to be a technical person to drive innovation. Instead, you really need to understand the problem that you're solving. So you need that vision, you need judgment, and you also need the ability to hire the right people so they can build the technology. In this episode, you will hear what non-technical founders get wrong when they hire developers. You'll hear the difference between startup CTOs and big company CTOs, and this is really important because people make mistakes here, and I don't want you to do that. And you'll also hear about the Windley Rules, and that's basically about why it's the engineer's job to make sure that you understand, not necessarily the other way around. If you've ever felt left out of the conversation by tech bros, this one is for you. David, when we spoke earlier, you told me that Yahoo executives were really determined to decide whether they were running a tech company or a media company. Now, why did that matter?
It's a good question. I think a lot of companies here in Silicon Valley, I don't want to say struggle with that, but that it is important. More about the culture of the company and sort of how you approach the market. Let me tell you a little bit more about what I mean. I also worked for Microsoft, and Microsoft is clearly a tech company. I don't think anyone would dispute that. And what is the difference there is, I think, Microsoft leads with technology. They obviously have great products that, in many cases dominate their market. But from their founding and ongoingly, they're always researching the next tech and then figuring out that technology, what sort of products may come out of that and introducing to the market, like an entrepreneur would, right? I think Google, clearly you would say, is a tech company. I think Yahoo is when I was there in the 2000s, and they were the leader in digital media. So I understand the argument and why people care, right? A lot of it's identity. And I think for technologists, they want to be part of a tech company, but it really should be irrelevant. It's focus on what is your business, trying to figure out how to succeed in the business you're in and using technology to succeed in that business. Again, I'll go back to say a Netflix or an Airbnb or Uber, right? And I think, yes, it was a discussion. It's a discussion that seems to always happen here in Silicon Valley. But I think what people should focus on, and especially if you're starting your company, is maybe there's a new technology that got you, to come up with a new product or whatever. But at some point, you are going to be competing in a market. What is your solution? What are your customers buying? And that's the business you're in. And stay focused on that and being number one at that. That would be my take on it.
We make this distinction between tech-enabled and tech-first on the show.
Yeah.
And I generally tend to think that non-technical founders are really well placed to lead tech-enabled businesses because
Yes.
usually they or we rather have a vision, have an understanding of a problem. So it's usually some sort of business problem or a human problem, basically some sort of problem that somebody is willing to pay to solve.
Yes.
And then we use technology, or we hire people to help us use technology to solve that problem. But we can lead these companies because we've got the insight that really makes the money. And the insight, frankly, is not technology.
Yep.
Would you agree with that? Would you say that if you're a non-technical founder, tech-enabled, that's really the way to go?
Absolutely. I think you're going to be hard pressed to find many companies that aren't going to be tech enabled or that technology will help you with a competitive edge. I mean, even traditional companies these days need to use technology in a way to give them a competitive edge. But yeah, absolutely. If you're talking to founders out there, you're either solving a business problem or a consumer problem, staying on top of new technologies. The newest one is like generative AI these days, but staying on top of that, understanding its capabilities so that you can conceive of maybe new business models, new ways of approaching your business, your market with this technology.
And so in your experience, you have worked in large, we can say and tech-enabled businesses, and you're now leading your own tech-enabled company,
Yeah.
and you're a non-technical leader. And so how do you absorb this new knowledge? Because I think what tends to happen is that maybe if you are living in Silicon Valley, you kind of just absorb it because it's everywhere and you don't even realize you're absorbing it the way, if you're like I used to live in France and I used
Yeah.
to know so much about different wines and different cheeses. I didn't take a course. It's just,
Yeah.
everybody knows, you almost breathe it in the air. Now I'm not in France, I don't really remember it. So I think I would assume, and from what I've seen, is that people in Silicon Valley who've worked in Silicon Valley companies, they just absorb it. But when you see people who haven't had that path, how would you say to them, okay, you do
Yeah.
need to, you're a business person, you need to learn something about tech, but, don't go crazy and take a 6-month-long coding course because that's just going to be pointless.
Yeah. Yeah. You're absolutely right. I think here, your coffee conversations, your cocktail conversations is about tech. So you're right. You tend to learn a lot or absorb, as you said, understanding of tech. Go out and seek it, and that there's information out there for any of us to understand.
So I think the
And
key there is the information is there, but you actually have to make an effort. If
you
you're
have to.
Silicon Valley, maybe you don't. The way in France, you just learn about wine. But in other places, put some time in your calendar to say that, okay, I'm going to dedicate, I don't know, 3 hours a week. And, they can be some of those hours can be listening to a podcast while you're doing something
Yeah,
else. But just be
absolutely.
conscious about it because unless you do it, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah. And the follow on to that, it's sort of at what level? You don't need to take a Python class, right? And become a coder. I would say it's more the equivalent. I went to school a long time ago, computer science 101, 102, right? Understand conceptually about these technologies. So let's talk about AI. So you need to take the AI 101, 102, maybe a little bit deeper types of courses in education, right? You need to understand how it works, right? Conceptually, and you need to understand its capabilities and et cetera. So that's the level. You don't have to become a machine learning engineer. And so I think that's important too. I think some people think they have to go into the guts of the technology and really understand. You're not going to be a chip designer, right? But you need to understand how a chip works, how a GPU works, what makes it different than the previous CPUs, et cetera. But yeah, you don't have to become a hardware designer.
And so now let's talk about your journey as a non-technical founder. So you worked in these really large companies, and then you decided to set up your own business. Why on earth would you do that? After being in a really nice position where you're respected, you're getting paid well, everybody's really impressed. Then you start a company, nobody knows its name, you don't know when you're going to get paid.
Yeah.
What on earth happened?
Yeah. I didn't retire from corporate and say I want to do startups necessarily. So the journey is sometimes you're lucky enough here in Silicon Valley to retire fairly early. And so I did retire from corporate and entered what I call my portfolio phase of my career, started getting on boards. I personally angel investor in the space I know, which is the combination of tech and talent space. So I invested in some companies in that area. We grew that company from less than $1 million to a $50 million company at its peak. We did sell it to Caldwell Partners. And so that was my first journey as a, sort of an entrepreneur building a company. And then within that company, again, being a consumer of tech for recruiting and seeing where technology was going, which I can see with AI, that AI could do more and more of what the recruiter's job is. And so we started building software within that company. And then I convinced Caldwell to let me spin that out. And that is my tech startup, HootRecruit. So that's kind of my journey.
The line that I'm seeing here is basically your professional expertise working in HR and recruitment at these large companies, understanding that problem and, all the problems that come with HR, which are very colorful, especially if you go to a Coldplay concert, that's an HR nightmare. So, God, I forgot what I was about to say now. So there was this line of your expertise, and that expertise essentially got developed as you grew, but also then got scaled with technology. I think this is something that I really want non-technical innovators to see, is that I think the media really loves the story of a 20-year-old dropout who then becomes a billionaire. And yes, that sometimes happens, really annoying, but most of the time it doesn't, right? Most people who become successful entrepreneurs, they start their companies in their 40s. And there is a reason for that, because you've got to actually know what you're doing a little bit. Right?
Yes. No, that's true. And I forget the exact stat, but yes, that is definitely true, that most entrepreneurial businesses are started people that are older than 20 and people that have knowledge of whatever kind of business or process that they develop. And so, yes, so I would say to your other entrepreneurs or future entrepreneurs out there, take something that you understand, that that where you see that there's a problem to be solved or a better way to do something. And then, yes, if technology, and more times than not, technology can help you with a better way of doing things, yes, then absolutely bring in the tech to enable your business to be successful.
So now I want to ask about your original area of expertise, which is recruitment, because you have interviewed engineers when you were running HR at Yahoo, but you also interviewed tech people for your tiny startup.
Yeah.
So first of all, how different is that process? Big company hiring versus tiny startup hiring.
Yeah, for me, it's really different because for me, being at the C-suite or executive level, most of the time when I'm hiring or you're in the interview process with technologists, I'm looking for the leader, right? And typically I'd be part of a team, an interview team. And so I'd have other people on the interview team that can assess more the technical capabilities of that person. And I would be focused on more their leadership characteristics and other characteristics that make you a great teammate or an executive. when I'm interviewing for my small company, I do need to have some understanding of this person going to be able to code and do the tech, right? So, when I've hired, I've only got 2 engineers, is I have to lean on, their experience, right? Looking at what they've actually accomplished, right? So I may not be able to go and understand their code specifically, but I can see the results, right? So what have you accomplished? What have you done? And see if that's good product, good results. And then heavily reference, right? Their background, what they've done, and talk to their leaders, their other technical leaders.
So this
So
actually
yeah, it's
sounds like
real
common
tougher.
sense because,
Yeah,
I find that a lot of our students get really freaked out about hiring developers. And I think, well, most of us have hired a lawyer at some point, right? Whether it's
correct,
to buy a house or, for something. But none of us decided that we need to go to law school before we hire a lawyer. Right?
correct.
We kind of we figured out generally what they're doing, but it was the same thing. We look at, okay, does this person get results, or does this person have a track record of creating contracts that are then fall apart?
Right.
And we see, okay, who else have they worked for, and based on that, we generally tend to make our decisions.
Yes.
It's good to see that you were saying that actually technology use the same things, use the same concepts as you would
It's the
to
same
hire a
same
lawyer.
method. Yeah, exactly. And you will have to lean into those other indicators much more than if it was in your area of expertise, right? Where you can interview, ask the right questions, you can get a feel. But you're right. It's just like anything that you're not an expert in. You're going to have to rely on, look at the actual results, see how they've done, reference through looking at results, the reference through talking to people. Yeah, the same methodology.
And also, I want to differentiate between what you're looking for in a big tech leader versus in a startup. Because, you can, even if you have a CTO in a startup, let's say that startup has 10 people, and then you have the CTO of Yahoo.
Yeah.
Then, are they the same job?
No, very, very different. And so I think, the key is, as we say here in America, you got to roll up your sleeves, right? As a startup. And so I think that's critical because there are a lot of people that are very capable, but for, depending on where they are in their career, just their own mindset, it might be hard for them to really roll up their sleeves and work 12 hours a day or 10 hours a day at least, and, add some weekend time, which is necessary to start up. So, yeah, I think that's the 2 major characteristics that you have to look for at a startup that would be different is, can someone really get in and do the details?
You can't say
Right.
that, I've got this PhD from Oxford, I'm this brilliant person. It's like, well, we all do, but the printer's
Yeah.
broken. It
Yeah.
has to be
Yes.
fixed.
That's the rolling up your sleeves. Exactly. If you're not willing to do that, then yeah, that's not a great match.
So what does a CTO at a company like Yahoo do? Are they writing any
Yeah.
code?
Yeah. So, in fact, at a big company, you have different tech leaders, and organizations organize differently, but you could see that there is a leader of development, like product development. So the one that's actually the products that are being developed, being engineered, sometimes it's even just head of engineering, right? Sometimes they put it together, product and engineering. So there are different constructions. And then you also often have someone set aside doing more just pure technology.
I think this actually is a good demonstration. Like, I don't think you meant it, but I think it's a good demonstration of why people from big companies, when they join a small company, why it can be a complete disaster. Because, if they're used to doing research, which is really useful for a company like Microsoft, for a startup, you can't only do research unless it's OpenAI, but that's a whole world of its own, right?
Yeah.
And so before I let you go, there's one thing I want to ask you, one more thing I want to ask you. You told me earlier on about the Windley Rule. So tell the audience, what is the
Yeah.
Windley Rule and why did it
I
arise?
had it come about. Yeah. Earlier in my career, I used to work for a company, Silicon Graphics, which for a lot of your younger viewers may not know Silicon Graphics, but in the 90s, Silicon Graphics basically invented the graphics chip, the GPU. Yeah, so NVIDIA, which is doing now, which is behind all these AI supercomputer servers, right? But they were the first sort of graphics company. They had graphics chips, the graphic language. So very, very technical company. They kind of invented the graphics. I was an executive in, many meetings. And in one meeting, we had one of our product people kind of explaining and talking to the team. And one of our executives, the top executive, looked at the guy and he whatever his name was, I'm not going to declare his name. He's like, you need to be able to explain this so that Windley can understand it. Now, understand the context. I'm the human resources person. So from a job title point of view, the kind of the least technical person, right, in the room, even though I do have an understanding of tech. But the point was that you need to be able to explain your product, even if it's a very technical product, right? If you're going out to the marketplace, so that a non-technical person can understand it. So that was the Windley Rule. He was saying it jokingly, but then it caught on inside the company. It was like when a tech person is talking too techie to a general audience, people would come back and say, yeah, the Windley Rule, make sure that Windley can understand it. So it was kind of joking, but the point is well taken.
I think this is really useful for non-technical leaders to actually know that this is a thing, because I've certainly been in situations when a technologist is speaking and I have no idea what they're talking about. I don't understand at all. And at the start of my journey into tech, I used to think that I am doing something wrong. I should figure this out. And so I would secretly go on YouTube and try to watch these technical videos, which would be even more confusing, and it would just be a road to nowhere.
Yeah.
But now my view, what you're basically saying is that, okay, if a technical person is speaking to other tech people, fine, speak your language. But if you're coming outside that bubble, if you're speaking to business leaders, and often business leaders are the budget holders.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
They're important. So then it is upon the engineer, it is upon the technical person to speak to us in a way that we understand. It doesn't mean that we don't make any effort. Like you said, we also make an effort to learn, but it's an effort from both sides. And it's like any success relationship.
I think that's the key.
Yeah.
What you just said is the key is, we talked earlier about non-technical people knowing enough about the tech, right? Knowing conceptually what it does, and then the tech person needs to lift it up to that abstraction layer and talk in those terms. And then that's where we can intersect, right? So if we educate ourselves enough to understand the tech at an abstraction level, what it can do, what it's capable of, and then the technologist, instead of being in the weeds, bring it up to that level, then that's the intersection. And we both have to make that effort. Absolutely.
Well, I think this is a really, really good and positive note to end on. And I think it's also just a sign of any kind of good relationship, right? It's both people thinking about the other person's perspective and thinking, okay, what can I do to make life better, to make it easier for the other person? And that's how we have great relationships, great friendships, and so on. So thank you so much for joining us, David. And if people want to learn more from you, where can they find you?
Well, they can come to HootRecruit.com. That's our company. And if they wanted to find me directly, I'm at david@iqrecruit.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
All right. Thanks.
I hope you found this conversation useful. But remember, inspiration without action is just entertainment. And frankly, there's so much better entertainment out there than listening to business podcasts. So if you're serious about building your product and changing your career, then check out our signature Tech for Non-Technical Founders program. There you'll get the framework that my students have used to go from idea to product. There you'll get the framework that our students have used to go from idea to product, to get into top accelerators, raise funding, and even land dream jobs in venture capital and product leadership. Not bad. You'll learn how to go from idea to live product. You learn how to avoid wasting money, super important, And also, you will figure out when to use AI and when to hire the pros. The link for the Tech for Non-Technical Founders program is in the show notes, or just go to techfornontechies.co. And on that note, thank you very much for listening today, and I shall be back in your delightful smart ears next week. Ciao!